Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How's everybody doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I hope you're healthy. And I hope you're having some fun. Today's Critter Chat, we're going to talk about a very odd-looking and unique animal. Today, we're talking about the okapi. Now, if you've never seen an okapi, I encourage you to go back to the photo I posted earlier today on Instagram or Facebook and check out what an okapi looks like. Okapi are very unique looking animals, and they are a bit confusing to a lot of people as to what kind of animal that is, especially since it's not an animal we often learn about or see outside of a handful of zoos. People often wonder what the okapi is related to, or if it's a cross between two different types of animals because of its unique coloration and body shape and features. But the okapi is actually the closest living relative of the giraffe. And to get a better idea of how that's possible, if you look closely at an okapi's head and a giraffe's head, you'll notice some similarities. Particularly if you're looking at a male okapi. Male okapi, like both male and female giraffes, have these little horns right up on top of their head. And those horns are covered with fur or hair. And so those are called ossicones. And ossicones are only present in giraffe and okapi. Giraffe and okapi share the same organization on the family scale, down to the family level as members of the Giraffidae family. And then they are separated out there as two big genuses, the okapi and the giraffe, and then giraffe is then divided into several species of giraffe. There's only one kind of okapi. Okapi also were unknown to science. Western scientists hadn't documented an okapi until the early 1900s, so they've only been known for a little over 100 years. Before that, no people from Europe or the Americas had really heard of them or seen them, or certainly nobody had described them in a scientific way and figured out what they were related to and done any research on them, where they live, what they eat, how they behave, any of those things. But let's talk a little bit more about some of their interesting features. So they also have very large ears, kind of like a giraffe, and they're able to move those ears independently. And in the forest, they'll often do something kind of like this, where one ear's kind of listening for what's in front of them, and one ear's kind of turned around and listening behind them. They have a really great sense of hearing, and they rely on their sense of hearing more than their other senses to help warn them of any danger that may be lurking about. Similar to giraffes, they also have a really long tongue. Their tongue can be up to 18 inches in length, and also like giraffes, their tongue is usually a dark color, usually kind of a bluish purple, sometimes black. Although I do know an okapi who has a pink tongue, so it's not 100% always the case. Their dark colored tongue, with giraffes, the scientists figured that that was the case because their tongue spends so much time outside of the giraffe's mouth. The darker coloring helps to prevent the tongue from getting sunburned as it licks the leaves off of trees. And okapi feed in a very similar way to the giraffe, but they do so in a very different habitat setting. Giraffe live kind of out on the grasslands and among the little trees that are along the edges of the plains of Africa. Okapi fully live in the rainforest. In fact, they only live in one forest in one country in all of the world. And that country is in Africa, and it is called the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is kind of a long name for a country, but so is United States of America. So don't be too worried about a long name. That country was formerly known as Zaire, and before that known as the Belgian Congo. So it's had a lot of names over its history. But the forest they live in is called the Ayaturi Forest. And it's a pretty large forest in the northeast region of a very large country in the middle of Africa. Now, that country is kind of more on the western side of Africa, and most of that country has been covered with rainforest, and that is the habitat that okapis live in. In their forest home, they have some unique features that help them to kind of live their life. And one of those, if you looked at their hair or their coat, you may have noticed that it's very velvety looking. And I am here to tell you it also feels like velvet. It's super, super soft, and it's a little bit oily. And that helps them in a rainforest where it rains a lot to stay a little drier. So when water hits an okapi, it just kind of beads up and runs off the side. So they don't get super wet. That way they can maintain a better body temperature. They don't get chilled if it gets cool and rainy. Now, a lot of people think that they may be related to zebras, especially because of the stripes that are on their back end. There's a lot of animals out there with stripes. It's just zebras are the ones that we know the best, zebras and tigers. And zebras and tigers are not closely related, so stripes doesn't necessarily mean that they're related. But the striping on an okapi does look a lot like a zebra striping, and it serves a similar purpose. The stripes on a zebra help the zebra to kind of blend in with other zebras and help protect them and camouflage them during predators running after the herd. It helps confuse the predator as to which animal is which. With the okapi, they don't live in herds, so it doesn't act quite the same way, but it does help them to blend in with their forest surroundings. So as you look at me standing and talking today, you can see that there's partial sun in and around where I'm standing. And that's how sunlight filters through trees in the forest. And you can even see the striping behind me on this large palm leaf. That looks quite a bit like the striping on an okapi. And so that striped pattern helps them to blend in to their forest home. So it serves as a camouflage, just a bit different than like the stripes on a zebra help a zebra. The stripes on an okapi are also a unique pattern. Just like the stripes on a zebra are unique to each zebra, and like the spots on a giraffe. So those are as individual as our fingerprints, and that helps a baby okapi be able to follow its mother through the forest. The forest they live in is very thick, lots of bushes and trees really close together, and the baby needs to be able to see where the mom is going. So it kind of imprints on what the mom looks like and follows her through the forest. They spend most of their daytime looking for food. So they eat between 40 and 65 pounds of food per day. And if that sounds like a lot of food, it is. It's a lot of food. But they are big animals. So a full-size okapi, an adult okapi, is roughly the size of a horse. So they're pretty good size. Some horses are definitely much bigger, don't get me wrong. But the females of okapi are larger than the males, which is kind of unique and interesting. That is not usually the case for most mammals. But the females are usually between 500 and 775 pounds. The males are more between 450 to 650 pounds. So you could have a male bigger than the female, but it's pretty rare. They also stand 5 feet tall at the shoulder, and with their head, they're about 6 feet tall. The okapis that I worked with, the female was taller than me. Her head was higher than my head, so she was a very big girl. The males that I worked with were all about looking me in the eye or just close to it. So they were about as tall as I was at their head. Now let's talk a little bit about their communication. This is something that puzzled scientists for a long time. How do these animals find each other? They live solitary, so they don't live in groups, they live alone. A mom with her baby, or maybe a male and a female that have come together to breed. That's about the only time you'll see multiple okapi together, unless there's a really good food source that they've all kind of gathered around. But they communicate mostly through their sense of smell. Now, they can do that through their urine, through their pee. They'll pee on things and they can smell that as they go around. That's very important to them. It's a little gross for us. I'm glad we have other ways of communicating. But they also have a scent gland on their foot, on their hoof, and it leaves a little bit of an oily, almost tar-like substance as they walk through the forest, and they can smell each other from that scent gland. And for a long time, scientists thought they only used their sense of smell, and their sense of smell is very important. When Okapi, even in a zoo setting, when I would come in the morning, the first thing they would really want to do is smell me. They would stick their nose pretty close to mine, and we would often take a moment and smell each other. So that kind of helped develop their trust with me as one of their keepers. They would breathe in, I would breathe out. Then I would breathe in, and they would breathe out. And that's called an exchange of breath. It's something that a lot of hoofed animals do to help recognize each other. I would do that with the giraffes that I worked with when I was a zookeeper as well. It's a really interesting experience, and it's a very great way to kind of help build a relationship so that they know who you are when you're their person taking care of them. But they also communicate with some vocalizations, and that eluded scientists and researchers for a long time because most of the sounds they make, we can't hear. They're too low frequency for our ears to be able to hear them. And those sounds are also too low frequency for predators to hear, which is kind of nice. They can talk in like this secret language that's just too low frequency for most other animals to understand or hear. They've done recordings of okapis, and a computer can usually pick up that there is sound being made and transmitted below the frequency of what humans can hear, which is pretty cool. They have also learned that giraffes are capable of that, so that's another trait that they share. Together, they can both communicate in sounds we do not hear. So when a mom has a baby okapi, it's a little interesting. Some other animals do this. It's definitely different than giraffes. Giraffes, when they have a baby, their mom and the baby stay together absolutely the entire time. There's not real good places for a baby to hide out on the grassland, and there's a lot of predators on the grasslands that would go after a baby giraffe. So they stay together. An okapi, she hides her baby. She'll hide her baby under a log or behind a big rock or in some really thick bushes, and she'll go off and leave it. And she'll leave it for hours at a time. And she'll go eat a lot of food, and then she'll come back after like 4 or 5 hours and feed it and spend some time with it. And then she'll leave again and go find more food. So it's a really interesting behavior that an okapi does. That's a pretty big animal to be doing that kind of thing. And their main predator is leopards. Leopards can sometimes go after adults, but leopards, and there's a few other cats that live in that rainforest that would maybe go after the baby as well. But to help kind of protect the baby further, the baby has no scent. So it can't be smelled by anything that's moving through the forest. In fact, it doesn't even poop until it's about a month old. So because of that, there's no scent that can really be traced back to the baby, and the baby's pretty good at hiding and staying separated while the mom goes off and eats. Now the babies, when they are born, they weigh about 35 pounds, so it's a pretty good sized baby. They're about 2.5 feet tall, and they are absolutely adorable. I'll see if I have photos of a baby that I can post up later today. So the baby stays hidden for about the first 2 months, and during that time, it nearly triples in size. So if it's born around like 35 pounds, it will be closer to like 100 pounds by the time it starts walking around and following its mom. With that, that's a pretty good sized baby, but it can definitely move a bit better through the rainforest once it's that old. It will start eating some leaves and some solid foods at about a month old, which is pretty quick. And sometimes the mom separates herself from the baby as young as like 6 months, which is really quick childhood for a pretty big animal. But okapi babies are some of the fastest growing babies of all the mammals out there. So like I said, it can triple its weight in 2 months, those first 2 months. And then it starts to slow down its growth, but continues to grow pretty quick. Within a year of being born, it's almost the size of its mom, although it's not technically sexually mature until about 3 years old. So like I mentioned, they're very shy and very solitary. That's probably why scientists didn't know about them for a long time. And also where they live, their jungle habitat is very, very dense, lots of bushes and trees. And the country they live in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has had a lot of problems over the years. It's a very poor country. It's had a lot of different government styles over the years. In fact, it was governed by 2 different European countries over a period of time. Both France and Belgium claimed it as a territory of their own and governed it for a long time, and caused a lot of stress on the local peoples. And there's a lot of different local ethnicities and in some areas tribes of people that live in that area, and they don't always get along. And that continues to be a problem today. Political unrest in that country has caused a lot of problems. They had a big civil war not that long ago that caused a lot of fighting and problems. And although the Okapi has been a national symbol of that country since 1933 and has been protected since that time and has been revered as a national symbol, it has still struggled to keep those protections in place during times of war and political unrest. There's usually bigger priorities for people to worry about than protecting an animal that lives out in a forest. And so because of that, the Okapi have struggled. Today they are listed as endangered. It is estimated that there are between 10,000 and maybe 20,000 of them left out in the wild. Again, their forest is so dense, they're pretty secretive, so it's hard to really know how many Okapi are out there. So they're big threats. To this day, political unrest causes problems. There's some militias, there's people with big guns out there who maybe don't agree with their neighbors, who are trying to take land away from other different ethnic groups who want to be in charge, and that still causes a lot of trouble in remote areas in Africa. Poaching is a huge issue for them. People in the area are often quite poor and struggle to get enough food, and so hunting for food is an issue. But also sometimes people will hunt them for their coat because it is very beautiful, and they can sell the meat to sell into the cities to restaurants who like to sell something called bush meat. It's kind of a unique novelty. If you go to Africa and you're a tourist, they want to have you try all these exotic types of food. I highly recommend you do not do that, because you are endangering endangered species by eating bushmeat. Often many of those are endangered or threatened animals, and the means for hunting them are often indiscriminate. They set traps and snares out there where they catch a wide variety of other things that you would never even think of eating. They get caught in those traps and get killed by those traps before they are ever harvested and taken to market. So I recommend never eating wild animals if you go to Africa, unless it is something that is very sustainably hunted, and they can tell you about that. Their last big threat is deforestation, or loss of habitat fragmentation. That's caused by a lot of different things. They live in a rainforest, so definitely the trees being cut down for lumber is a big issue. But also there's a lot of mining that takes place in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And one of the minerals that they're after is something called coltan, C-O-L-T-A-N. Coltan is a very rare mineral that is not found in a lot of places on Earth, but it's used in cell phones. And so every cell phone has some in it, and all the coltan that comes that is used by cell phones comes from Africa. So it's pretty rare, and it is definitely causing problems. as if you buy a new cell phone every year, that's probably not the most sustainable way to live. But one thing we can do, I have a cell phone. I'm recording this on a cell phone. I'm not saying don't have a cell phone. It's kind of important in our society. But when you get a new cell phone, make sure you recycle your old cell phone. Companies are out there that will take apart the old cell phone and reuse the pieces, including the coltan, and that will help prevent other mining from occurring. Coltan is also a lot of human rights issues going on with the mining. Often children are forced to do the mining, and it's a very barbaric and horrible way to treat people, to force them to be miners. So it's a big issue. We won't get too far into it, but know it exists. So with all these problems that the Okapi face, there is a group out there that is doing some amazing work. They are called the Okapi Conservation Project. They are our special shout out today. I'll be putting up some links to what they do later on. But they were created in the 1980s, and they helped lobby the government to protect a big part of this Ayaturi forest where the Okapi live. And in 1992, the government of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which I believe was still called Zaire in 92, they set aside 1/5 of the forest as a wildlife refuge, which is really impressive for a country that struggles in so many ways. And the forest reserve that they set aside is called the Okapi Wildlife Reserve. It's about the size of 1.5 times bigger than Yellowstone National Park. So it's a big chunk of land that they set aside. And in that forest reserve, they estimate that there's about 5,000 or so Okapi that live there. So it's a pretty important place for this endangered species to live. But it's not just Okapi that live there. It was created for the Okapi, but there's also forest elephants, forest buffalo, chimpanzees, 12 other species of primates, a lot of species of birds and leopards, all share that same habitat and are also protected in that wildlife reserve. So by protecting the Okapi, many other animals are saved and protected as well. So the Okapi Conservation Project, this organization that's doing a lot of good to help protect that forest reserve, they also help their local communities. And we've talked about the importance of that in the Earth Day episode of Critter Chat. If you go back and listen to that, that talks about one of my favorite wildlife conservancies, which is in Kenya in Africa, Lewa Wildlife Conservancy. And I believe the Okapi Conservation Project is somewhat modeled after what the Lewa project does in Kenya. They do a lot of agroforestry. So that means they help the people in the little communities, in the villages, use the forest, but in a sustainable way so that they can grow the food that they need, but still keep the big trees and the forest out there in a way that prevents them from cutting down the forest entirely to grow crops that maybe wouldn't do so well. They also help teach them about the importance of irrigation and farming different crops at the right time of year to get the best growth rate for the crops. They also help build schools and clinics and help with women's programs, helping women be able to provide additional income for their families. Sometimes these are women who are single mothers whose husbands may have been put into the army or killed in the war that are still struggling to make ends meet. And so they also do help a lot with that, as well as helping adults learn life skills that can help out their families. They've also done a lot to help with community gardens, and they have nurseries near the villages that help to grow little trees from seedlings and help replant the forest in the areas around the reserve. They had a goal of 60,000 new trees last year, and they were able to exceed that by 10,000 extra trees. So they were able to give out 70,000 baby trees and plant them in all the communities around the reserve to help increase the likelihood of the forest to continue. And a lot of those trees that they plant also produce fruit or nuts that the people can use as food. So it's a win-win situation to help build the forest back up, but also to grow things that can help the people who may be struggling to find food. And then, of course, the Okapi Conservation Project does a lot in providing rangers that help to protect the okapi and the other animals that live in the reserve, and help to ensure that the government laws are enforced out there. So they do a lot of really great work. I'll post some more things about that organization later on today. I also want to talk a little bit about my experience with okapis. Now, I have not been to the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I don't know that I will go there. It's not a very safe place for most Americans to travel to right now, especially right now. You can't travel anywhere. But even before coronavirus, it was not a very safe place always for Americans. So it's a very risky place to go. I don't know that I'll see a wild okapi in my life. But I have seen okapis and been able to help care for okapis in a zoo setting. And when I was a zookeeper at the Los Angeles Zoo, I had the great honor of helping take care of 5 different okapis there, 2 of whom were born there, and then their mom, they shared a mom, but they had different dads. So I took care of both the dads, the mom, and the 2 kids that were born there. And okapis are one of my favorite animals to work with. They're very gentle, they're very kind, and once they get to know you, they are very trusting of people. Up to that point, they're a little shy and a little elusive if they don't know you, but once they get to know you and know who you are, they're pretty comfortable and really cool to work around. They're also very soft to touch. Touching an okapi is one of the most amazing things that I've been able to do, because they feel even softer than they look. And it's actually like petting velvet if you can touch an okapi. However, they also like to lick, and I've been kissed by an okapi multiple times by their big tongue. Their big tongue is covered in very sticky saliva, and it's a little rough, kind of like some sandpaper, so their kisses are not always as nice as they could be, but it's still pretty interesting. I did have an okapi kiss me once, and he licked me right on the bottom of my nose. His tongue went into my nose a little bit, and then he took my glasses off my face. So it can be a unique experience in working with them. But during my time at the LA Zoo, I was able to watch the older of the 2 babies grow up. He was already born before I started there, but I worked with him up until the time he moved to another zoo. And then when his little sister was born, I was able to work with her shortly after she was born until she was growing up as well. And both of their parents, so the 2 dads and the mom. And it was really great to be able to work with the okapi, a really amazing species to work with, and something that I'm very passionate about being able to learn about and share with you today. So I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you in this Critter Chat about okapi. If you've missed any of the other Critter Chats, full episodes are uploaded onto Facebook and YouTube every day. YouTube sometimes has a little struggle getting the privacy settings right. I'm trying to work that out. And Instagram recently is letting me upload the full episode there, so it should post shortly after this live recording. So feel free to go back and check out any of the previous episodes you may have missed, and I'll post additional information about Okapi on the Facebook page later today. As always, feel free to like, follow, subscribe, and share any of the Zoo Nerd content with family and friends and others who you may think would enjoy it. Until tomorrow, stay safe, be happy, have fun, and I'll see you then. Take care. Bye.